I am Brigitte Olsen, and at 28 years old, I found out that my own name had been crossed out of my parents' will, erased in black ink like a line item expense that yielded no return on investment. My mother looked me in the face that day and called me their biggest disappointment. My father sat 3 feet away from her and said nothing. They passed the family estate valued at $4 million. The house, the business, the rental cottages, the land, everything that our grandmother had built and left for me, to my sister, while leaving me a check for $1. I thought that was the worst part. It wasn't. What my sister did behind my back to make it happen was worse. And what I did about it 3 years later, when my lawyer picked up the phone and called their lawyer, that is the part my father still cannot explain. He just kept repeating the same thing over and over again, as if saying it enough times could make it stop being true. But I am getting ahead of myself. The morning everything cracked wide open began with a family meeting at my grandmother's house. I had driven 4 hours, thinking we were going to discuss her estate together as a family. As it turned out, the decisions had already been made. I was the only one who didn't know. Burlington, Vermont is the kind of town where your family name means something, whether you want it to or not. The Olsen family had been there since the 1940s, and the house, a sprawling Victorian-style mansion that my grandmother Ingrid restored board by board in the early 80s, sat on Church Street as if it owned the entire block. Dark walnut stairs, stained glass windows with original bevels, a covered porch that creaked in a way that sounded like home. When I was 9, I hadn't lived there for 6 years, but every time I walked through that front door, the scent hit me the same way. Floor wax, old wood, and something warmer underneath that I could never quite name. On that October day, I parked behind my sister Crystal's new crossover and noticed that the driveway had been repaved with new natural stone. A small detail that stuck with me. Inside, the dining table was set like a board meeting. Folders, glasses of water, a notepad at every seat. My father, Peter, stood by the window, looking at something in the yard. My mother, Teresa, sat at the head of the table, which was unusual because that was Grandmother Ingrid's chair. The family estate attorney, Mr. Meyer, was already seated, an envelope in front of him. Crystal was on her phone, legs crossed, not looking up. "Sit down, Brigitte," my mother said. "No hello." I sat. Mr. Meyer opened the envelope, and my mother looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not anger, not pity, something rehearsed. I remember the dark walnut beneath my shoes, the grain running toward the staircase. I remember thinking how strange it was that I noticed the floor at a moment like that. Mr. Meyer read the revised will in that flat, legal drone that makes everything sound like the weather. The house on Church Street, 2 rental cottages on Bank Street, the family antique shop on Main Street, savings accounts, land, a total estimated value just under $4 million, all transferred to Crystal Renee Olsen. My share of the estate was listed on a separate line, $1. A no contest clause underneath meant that if I challenged anything, I would lose even that. Crystal didn't react. She already knew. I could tell by the way her posture didn't shift, by the way she kept her phone face down on the table, as if waiting for this part to end. My mother was the one who spoke. She straightened up in Grandmother Ingrid's chair, looked at me over her reading glasses, and smiled. Not a warm smile, not even an angry one, just a tight-lipped little gesture that said she had rehearsed this. "We discussed this thoroughly, Brigitte. Your father and I both agreed." She paused. "You have always been our biggest disappointment." The room didn't go quiet, because it was already quiet. A low hum filled my ears. I gripped the edge of the stair railing behind my chair because the floor felt tilted by 2 degrees. My father stared out at the yard. Mr. Meyer closed his folder. Crystal uncrossed her legs and stood up, as if the meeting were over. I sat there with one hand on the dark walnut, holding a single dollar from an estate that should have been mine, and the only coherent thought I had was a question I didn't ask out loud. How long had my sister known before I walked in? My mother had her reasons, and she laid them out like a woman rehearsing in front of a mirror. "Threw away the family path," she said. "Grandmother Ingrid built the shop. My father grew it. Crystal married well and stayed close, while I left to do what she called paper drafting. She said it the way someone says, finger painting. My father still wasn't speaking. He stood by the window with his hands in his pockets, nodding slightly every few seconds, like a man agreeing with something playing on a radio in another room. "We sacrificed everything to build a respectable life here," my mother said. "Your sister understood that. You didn't." I wanted to remind her that I had a degree in architectural heritage restoration, that I worked 60 hours a week at a firm in Madison before going independent, that restoration was a licensed career with real responsibility and clients who trusted me with six-figure budgets. But she wasn't finished. "People talk, Brigitte. They told us you're in debt, that you can't keep clients, that you're unstable." Unstable. The word hit like a slap. I had never missed a rent payment. I had never borrowed $1 from anyone in that room. I was never fired, never sued, never late on a tax return. So who exactly was telling my parents that I was falling apart? I looked at Crystal. She was pouring herself water, calm. My mother kept talking about how they didn't make this choice lightly, how it was really about protecting what the family had built. But I stopped listening to the words. I was doing the math. Unstable, in debt, can't keep clients. Someone had spent a long time crafting this version of me, and I was sitting across the table from her. It didn't come all at once. It came in pieces over the next hour between legal papers and water refills, with my mother repeating herself as if the will had a director's commentary. My father's old colleague, Oscar Schmidt, had apparently told my parents that I asked him for a loan. I hadn't. Oscar's wife, Greta, mentioned at a church luncheon that she heard I was having trouble. Her exact words. She couldn't remember who she heard it from. My mother said 3 different neighbors expressed concern. 3 different neighbors who all happened to be people Crystal saw regularly. And then there was that thing Crystal said at a family barbecue last Thanksgiving, in front of 12 people, including my aunt and 2 cousins. I wasn't there. Astrid, my cousin, told me later in a text I had missed. Crystal held a glass of apple cider and said lightly, as if making a comment about the weather, "Brigitte can't even keep a home aquarium alive." 12 people laughed. My aunt changed the subject, but the line stuck. It stuck because it was small enough to be funny and sharp enough to serve as a verdict. It wasn't about aquariums. It was about competence. And Crystal had been running this campaign for nearly 2 years. A word here, a concerned sigh there, a small shake of the head whenever someone mentioned my name. Until the version of me that existed in Burlington became someone I had never met. A mess, a flight risk, a girl who couldn't even keep a home aquarium alive. By the time my parents revised the will, they weren't cutting out their daughter, they were cutting out the character Crystal had written for them. I just hadn't been in the audience. The only thing in that will that didn't go to Crystal was an oak box. Grandmother Ingrid left it to me specifically by name in a clause that Mr. Meyer read almost as an afterthought. A small box made of stained oak, silver hinges, a tiny latch that clicked when opened. I had seen it on her dresser my whole life, but I had never looked inside. She died 11 months before the family meeting, and the box had sat in a storage closet in the house ever since the funeral. My mother brought it out and set it in front of me like a consolation prize. Crystal looked at it, then at me. "She left you a box," she said. "Fitting." I picked it up. It was lighter than I expected. The scent of oak was still strong, that sharp, clean smell that meant grandmother's bedroom, grandmother's hands, grandmother measuring molding profiles at her drafting table with the small silver folding rule she had kept since I was born. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Not in that room. Not in front of people who had just reduced me to $1 and a cardboard box. "I'll keep it," I said. "Thank you." Crystal looked at my mother looked at the table, my father looked at the yard. Nobody asked me to stay. Nobody asked how I felt. Nobody said they were sorry, or that it was hard, or that it didn't mean they didn't love me. The oak box sat in my hands like a small, sealed question. Why would Grandmother Ingrid, who could have left me money or furniture or a piece of land, leave me this instead? I tucked it under my arm. I didn't open it for 5 months. I drove to a motel outside of town that night, sat on a bed that smelled of bleach, and thought about what a fight would look like. I could hire a lawyer. I could argue undue influence, or that Crystal had manipulated the process, or that my mother's stated reasons were based on fabricated information. I could drag it into probate court and let a judge in Chittenden County figure out if disappointment was legal grounds for disinheritance. I ran the numbers. It would take 2 years minimum, cost money I didn't have, and even if I won, I would spend the rest of my life in a town that had already decided who I was. My parents would never speak to me again. Crystal would tell everyone I sued my own family. The neighbors would nod and say, "See? Unstable, just like we heard." So I made a different choice. I wouldn't fight for a seat at a table that had erased me. I would build my own table somewhere else. I chose Portland, Maine, because an architectural specialist I once worked with told me the historic housing stock was magnificent, the restoration market was growing, and nobody there would know or care that Brigitte Olsen was someone's biggest disappointment. I called my landlord in Madison and gave 30 days' notice. I sold my couch, my bookcase, and my coffee table, things I had chosen with care, because that's what restorers do, we choose things, and made $1,100. I loaded my car with clothes, a drafting set, my laptop, and grandmother Ingrid's oak box. It sat in the passenger seat, still sealed. I pulled out of the motel parking lot at 6 a.m., Burlington shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was just a blur against the gray Vermont sky. 7 hours east on I-89 and south on I-95. I counted miles and state lines. Vermont into New Hampshire, into Maine. I had $3,200 in my bank account. My credit score was 740 because I had never missed a payment, no matter what Crystal told the neighbors. I had no job waiting, no apartment secured, only an ad I found for a furnished room above a bakery on Congress Street in Portland for $650 a month. The room was smaller than my old closet. 1 window, 1 radiator, 1 outlet that worked reliably. I placed grandmother Ingrid's oak box on the windowsill that first night, sat on the twin bed, and stared at it. The latch caught the street lamp light. My hand reached out. I touched the silver hinges. I almost opened it. My thumb was on the clasp when something stopped me. Not fear exactly, but a feeling that whatever was inside was the last new thing grandmother Ingrid would ever give me, and once I opened it, that too would be over. I pulled my hand back. My fingers were trembling, and I told myself it was the cold. "You have always been our biggest disappointment." The words sat in my skull like furniture I hadn't asked for. They were there when I brushed my teeth, there when I turned off the light, there when I lay in a strange bed in a strange city, listening to the radiator clank. I didn't know if architectural restoration could feed me in a city where I knew no one. I didn't know if I would ever stop hearing my mother's voice in every quiet room. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was not going back. Whatever I was going to build, it would be mine. No one else's name on it, no one else's permission required. The first 6 months in Portland were the hardest stretch of my adult life. I landed a part-time job at a finishes showroom on Commercial Street, $12 an hour, employee discount I couldn't afford to use. In the mornings, I set up displays. In the afternoons, I pitched myself to realtors as a freelance consultant for staging old houses on budgets under $300,000. Most said no. The ones who said yes paid $200 to $400 a job in cash. I ate rice and black beans 4 nights a week. I washed my hair with bar soap for 2 months because shampoo felt like a luxury I hadn't earned yet. I slept on the floor of my room for 3 weeks before an extra couch from a client's staging project became mine. I studied for my state license as a restoration specialist at the bakery counter downstairs, where the owner let me use the Wi-Fi after hours in exchange for reorganizing his storefront window. I filed the LLC paperwork myself, $60. I read every clause twice. Nobody helped me, nobody checked in. I didn't call home, and home didn't call me. But there was a moment, small and easily overlooked, that kept me from giving up. A realtor named Ingrid, sharing my grandmother's name though younger, in the West End asked me to evaluate a 1920s cottage that had been sitting on the market for 90 days. I walked through the rooms and saw what they could be. I rearranged the lighting, cleared out the original woodwork, added 2 borrowed decor pieces and linen drapery. Ingrid returned for photos and stopped at the living room doorway. "You see space differently," she said. It wasn't a grand compliment, it wasn't a career, but it was the first time in 6 months someone looked at my work and didn't see disappointment. I met Casper Lindner on a Tuesday in March in a half-gutted kitchen in the West End. A realtor had directed me to a homeowner who wanted a full interior redesign of a 1910 Queen Anne home, and when I showed up with my folder and tape measure, not my grandmother's, a cheap one from the hardware store, a man was already standing in the framing, studying the joists. Casper was a master builder who specialized in historic homes. Broad shoulders, boots dusted with plaster, a level clip to his belt the way other people carry phones. He had been restoring homes in coastal Maine for 11 years. He looked at my preliminary sketches and stopped at the one where I rerouted a pantry wall to save an original built-in sideboard. "That's a load-bearing wall," he said. I pointed to the beam transfer I had drawn. He stared at it for a long time. "You drew an engineering solution right inside the draft," he said. "Most designers just draw a pretty version and let me figure out the rest." That was the beginning. Casper didn't offer me money. He didn't save me. He offered something more practical, a partnership. He said if I could design restorations that respected a house's original bones, he could build them. 50-50, transparent books, clear division of roles. I hesitated. Not because the deal was bad, but because for a year I had been proving I could do everything alone, and saying yes to a partner felt like admitting I couldn't. Perfectionism masking as independence. The habit of carrying everything yourself because the last time you trusted a group, they voted you out of the family. I said yes anyway. "You design it right, I'll build it right." We shook hands in a kitchen with no floor. We named the firm Ironwood Restoration and Design. Casper's idea. Ironwood grows in Maine forests, and he said they look unassuming, but their wood could break an axe. I liked that. Our first real project was a 1924 bungalow in the East End, on the very street where my rented room sat above the bakery. The homeowner was a retired geography teacher named Matilda, who wanted the house restored to what it was when her parents bought it. Original trim profiles, period-appropriate hardware, and a dark walnut staircase that had been carpeted over in the 70s. The day we ripped up the carpet and found the wood underneath, dense grain, deep walnut color, not a single rotted board. I stood at the bottom, placed my hand on the railing, and felt something shift in my chest. It was the same wood species, the same era, the same hand-molded texture as the staircase in Grandmother Ingrid's house on Church Street. I hadn't thought about that staircase in months. I had trained myself not to. But standing in Matilda's house with a pry bar in one hand and sawdust on my jeans, I realized something I wasn't ready to name. I kept choosing old houses because I was trying to save the one I had lost. Not the property, not the money, the staircase, the wood that remembers feet, the original lines my grandmother spent years restoring because she believed a home should look like what it was, not what someone forced it to become. Matilda's bungalow took 4 months. We came in $800 under budget. She cried when she saw the staircase. I didn't cry. I took a photo and pinned it above my desk. Cousin Astrid texted me on a Saturday while I was sanding closet doors. She was the only family member who still talked to me, and even she kept it quiet. Short texts, no calls, nothing that would show up if Crystal checked her phone. "Crystal bought a boat," Astrid wrote. "She's remodeling grandmother's kitchen. White granite, everything. Your mom is thrilled." I put the phone down, picked it up, put it down again. I didn't reply for 3 hours. When I did, I typed, "How is the house?" Astrid sent a photo. The dining room wallpaper, hand-embossed 1920s fabric, a reproduction grandmother Ingrid had sourced from a mill in Boston, had been stripped and replaced with monochromatic plaster. I closed the photo. There was a second message, the kind Astrid sent when she was whispering even over text. "People still talk about you like you fell off a cliff. Crystal told Aunt Adita you owe $10,000 to a credit card company. I know it's not true, but nobody asks me. $10,000. I had never carried a balance over 400. I was living on rice, consultation fees, and a 50-50 split with a builder I'd known for months. But in Burlington, the version Crystal built was still walking around wearing my name, holding debts I never took on, failing in ways I never failed. I put the phone in a drawer. I went back to the closet doors. That was how I handled it. I sanded something until the surface was smooth and the original grain showed through. If that sounds like a metaphor, it isn't. It was Wednesday, and the doors had to be ready by Friday. If this story hits close to home, if someone in your family made you feel small for choosing your own path, stay with me. The turning point is coming. Leave a comment with one dream they told you to give up, and subscribe so the next story finds you. 3 weeks later, Astrid sent something else. Not a text this time, a screenshot. A family group chat on iMessage that had been active for over a year. Crystal, my mother, Aunt Adita, 2 cousins, and Oscar Schmidt's wife, Greta. I wasn't in it. I had never been in it. The messages scrolled back for months. Crystal, November. Just checking if anyone has heard from Brigitte. I'm worried about her. My mother. She hasn't called, probably for the best. Crystal, December. A friend of hers told me she's drowning in debt. I don't want to gossip, but I think we should be prepared if she asks for money. My mother's reply was a heart emoji. January, Crystal again. It breaks my heart to say this, but Brigitte has always been an embarrassment. Remember when she told grandmother she wanted to be a restorer, and grandmother just went quiet? My mother. Ingrid never said anything because she didn't want to hurt Brigitte's feelings. She knew that was a lie. Grandmother Ingrid was the only person who told me I had an eye for this. She was the one who let me take measurements at her drafting table. She was the one who said, "You see what other people walk right past." February, Crystal to the group. I think removing Brigitte from the will is the kindest thing. She'd just squander it. Greta Schmidt, thumbs up. Aunt Adita, sad but probably true. My mother agreed. I read the whole thread sitting on the floor of my studio with sawdust in my hair. The label of disappointment hadn't grown organically. It was planted, watered, and fertilized in a group chat I was never supposed to see. My parents hadn't disowned a daughter. They disowned a straw man my sister built in a text thread. And not once did they ask me if any of it was real. That night, I sat on the floor with the oak box on my lap. For 5 months, I had carried it from Vermont to Maine, from windowsill to nightstand to a shelf above my drafting table, never once lifting the latch. The silver was tarnished now. The scent of oak had faded to something you had to press your nose against the wood to find. I slid the latch. Inside, nestled in a piece of navy felt, were 3 items. First was Grandmother Ingrid's silver folding rule, the one she used at her drafting table, the one she used when measuring the original window frames of the house on Church Street before restoring them. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, made of warm metal, with tiny etched numbers worn smooth at the 1-inch and 12-inch marks. Second was a folded set of architectural drafts drawn by hand in ink and tracing paper, dated 1983, showing the complete restoration plan for the house on Church Street. Floor plans, facade details, pencil notes on the dark walnut stairs, the stained glass frame, the original crown molding. Grandmother Ingrid's handwriting, small and confident. And third was a letter. 1 page, blue ink, written on the antique shop's letterhead. Dear Brigitte, it began, if you are reading this, they have already decided you are difficult. I set the folding rule down. I unfolded the letter on the floor of my studio apartment in Portland, Maine, and read the rest by the light of a desk lamp I bought for $9 at a thrift store. The woman who raised me to see what others walked past saw this coming. She had packed the box for me the way you pack a lifeboat, sealing it in oak to keep out the damp. Grandmother Ingrid's letter wasn't long. She didn't waste words. She wrote that she had watched my mother favor Crystal for years, and that she spoke to my father about it once. He told her not to interfere. She wrote that she knew Crystal talked about me behind my back, that she told Crystal to stop, and that Crystal just smiled and changed the subject the way people do when they have no intention of listening. She wrote that she was leaving me the folding rule and the drafts instead of money because money gets spent but tools remain. And because the house on Church Street was the only thing she had ever truly built, she wanted the only person in the family who understood construction to have the plans. She wrote, "They will call you a disappointment. That is the family word for someone who refuses to shrink." And at the bottom, in smaller script, as if added later, "This house was the only thing I ever truly built. Don't let it belong to strangers." I read the letter 3 times. I pinned the drafts above my desk, next to the photo of Matilda's staircase, and I kept grandmother's silver rule in my drafting bag from that day on. I used it on every project, not because it was more accurate than a modern laser, but because every time I pulled it out, I was measuring with her hands. The oak box remained on my shelf, open now, the felt neatly folded inside. It smelled of her dresser, floor wax, old wood, and something warmer underneath that I still couldn't name. It smelled like the stairs on Church Street. I didn't know yet that I would see those stairs again, but the drafts were on my wall, the rule was in my bag, and the letter was in my coat pocket. I was already carrying the whole house with me. Over the next 18 months, Ironwood grew the way old houses grow, slowly, one good decision at a time. The East End bungalow led to a mansion in Ogunquit. The mansion led to a referral from the Preservation Society for a 1905 Victorian home in Kennebunkport. Casper and I hired our first employee, a stone and wood restorer named Lars, who could match century-old trim profiles by eye, then a project manager, then a part-time bookkeeper. We weren't rich, we were busy, which in the restoration world is better, because it means someone trusts you with their home and then tells a friend. I measured every new project with Grandmother Ingrid's silver rule. It became a habit, then a ritual. I would walk through empty rooms before demo began, rule in hand, taking measurements myself, not because I didn't trust tech, but because measuring by hand forced me to touch the walls, feel the plaster, notice where the floor had settled and where trim had been replaced. I measured twice, the way she taught no one but me. That's what I told Casper when he asked why I used a measuring tool from the 1970s. He stopped asking after the 3rd project. By the 22nd month, the regional design magazine New England Heritage contacted us for a feature. They saw our restoration portfolio online and wanted to photograph the Victorian house in Kennebunkport. I said yes because the exposure was good for business. I said yes because referrals are currency. And I said yes because some quiet part of me wanted that article to exist in a world where my name was still associated with failure. I didn't share it with anyone in Vermont, but I knew the internet doesn't care about state lines. The feature in New England Heritage came out in their spring issue. 4 pages, photos of the restored parlor, a quote from me about preserving bones that matter. There was a photo of me on page 2, standing on the porch we rebuilt to match the 1905 original, holding a set of blueprints. Astrid saw it first. She sent me a screenshot with no words, just 3 exclamation points. 2 days later, she texted again. "Your mom saw it. Someone at church showed her." I waited. No call, no text from Teresa, no message from Peter, no email from Crystal. Just a long, thick silence from Vermont that I could feel through the phone. Astrid filled in the blanks the way she always did, quietly, carefully, as if delivering something fragile. "Your mom said design magazines don't mean stability." Teresa's words, the exact same playbook. A 4-page spread in a respected heritage publication, and my mother reduced it to a hobby. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was tired, the way you get tired of a song that keeps playing in a store you can't leave. But there was something else Astrid mentioned almost as an afterthought. "I think something is going on with the house. Crystal is acting weird about money. Your dad looks stressed." I didn't ask for details. I didn't call. I didn't send the article to anyone in Burlington. I didn't write a letter to my parents or post it online with a caption proving people wrong. That wasn't the point. The point was the porch, the parlor, the silver rule in my hand. The point was that I was standing in a house I had saved, while somewhere in Vermont, the house my grandmother saved was beginning to rot from the inside out. I just didn't know it yet. Here is what was happening in Burlington while I was rebuilding staircases in Maine. Crystal had closed the antique shop. She said the market had shifted, that people were buying online, that foot traffic wasn't worth the overhead. My father, who had run that shop for 30 years, didn't argue. He signed the closure papers quietly, the way he signed everything, because Teresa said it was fine and Crystal said it was necessary. The shop building sold for less than its appraised value. Crystal invested the proceeds into a gourmet convenience food brand that she launched on social media with videos of presentations and tastings. It lasted 8 months. Then she took out a home equity loan against the Church Street house, the very one grandmother Ingrid had restored, the one that had been in the family for decades, the one meant to be the foundation of a $4 million legacy. She borrowed $380,000. My father signed as a co-borrower because Crystal told him it was temporary, a bridge loan to cover business losses until a new investor stepped in. The investor never came. Crystal stopped making payments after 4 months. The bank sent notices. My father found them in a stack of mail Crystal had hidden in a hallway closet. $380,000 leveraged against a house worth maybe $900,000 in good condition, and the condition was no longer good. The house on Church Street, the dark walnut stairs, the stained glass windows, the covered porch that creaked like a lullaby, was heading toward foreclosure. And my parents, who were still living in the guest cottage on the same lot, were about to lose the only address they had ever known. Meanwhile, in Portland, Ironwood was doing something I hadn't planned. It was becoming known. Not famous, not viral, known the way a good firm becomes known, by finishing projects on time and under budget, and answering the phone when clients call on Saturday. We completed 12 restorations in 2.5 years. Casper handled construction. I handled design, client relations, and business development. A nice way of saying I drove to a lot of coffee meetings and shook a lot of hands. We had a crew of 6, a real office, a converted studio warehouse by the port area with a drafting room and a materials library I built shelf by shelf. We were mentioned twice more, once in the Preservation Society Bulletin and once in a short segment on a regional public television show about New England architecture. An investor group in Boston reached out about partnering on a larger historic renovation, a former vintage mill in the valley being converted into a mixed-use art space. We said yes. That single project was worth more than everything we did in year 1 combined. I started getting calls from out of state, a developer in Portsmouth, a homeowner in Providence, a historic trust in Concord, New Hampshire, asking if we consulted. We were no longer a boutique startup. We were a revenue-generating firm with clients and a reputation built one restored porch at a time. We don't flip properties for a quick sale, I told a reporter from the Boston Globe who did a short piece on the mill project. We bring them back to life. That quote ran under a photo of Casper and me standing in the mill's original timber frame. I kept a copy in my desk drawer, not to show anyone, just to know it was there. Astrid called on a Thursday in September. Not a text, a call. That meant things were bad. "The house is going up for sale," she said. "Crystal can't cover the loan. Your dad tried to refinance, but the bank said no. There's a developer from Boston who wants to buy the lot and tear the house down to build a generic apartment complex." I stood by my drafting table. Grandmother Ingrid's drafts were pinned to the wall right in front of me. The front facade drawing, pencil notes on the staircase, measurements for the stained glass in her small, confident script. "How bad is the house?" I asked. Astrid sent photos while we were still on the phone. I opened them one by one. The front porch had a visible sag on the east side. Water damage, likely a gutter Crystal never fixed. 2 of the stained glass windows had plywood patches where the original glass had cracked. The interior shots were worse. The dark walnut stairs, the wood that remembers feet, had water stains running down the banister from a leak in the upper bathroom. The treads were warped. The original newel post, which Grandmother Ingrid restored by hand in 1984, had a crack running from the base to the first baluster. The house was dying. Not quickly, not dramatically the way houses fall in movies, but slowly, the way they fall in real life. One deferred repair at a time, one ignored drip, one owner who saw the house as an asset instead of a responsibility. I looked at the drafts on my wall. I looked at the photos on my phone. And I heard my grandmother's voice from the letter, clear and quiet. This house was the only thing I ever truly built. Don't let it belong to strangers. The developer from Boston was a stranger, but I wasn't. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Crystal. I called Casper, and then I called our attorney. The conversation was brief. Ironwood had the cash flow and investor relationships to make a competitive offer on the Church Street property. We could acquire it, restore it using grandmother Ingrid's original plans, and use it as a flagship project for Ironwood's first out-of-state expansion, a portfolio asset that would anchor our expansion into the Vermont market. The business case was clean. The personal case was complicated. Casper asked me once over the phone if this was about revenge. I told him no. He asked if it was about proving something. I told him no again. "Then what is it about?" he said. I looked at the drafts on my wall. "There's a house there worth saving," I said, "and I'm the only person left who knows what it's supposed to look like." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You design it right, I'll build it right." Our attorney submitted an offer under the firm's name, Ironwood Restoration and Design, LLC. No mention of Brigitte Olsen, no personal contact with the sellers, just a clean, cash-backed offer submitted through standard channels, with a clause requiring the buyer to preserve the property's historic character according to original architectural plans. The selling party, which by that point was my father because Crystal had frozen up, wouldn't know who was behind the offer until the final walkthrough. I wasn't buying my way back. I wasn't buying leverage. I wasn't buying the right to stand in my mother's dining room and say, "I told you so." I was buying a house worth saving. And if that made my family uncomfortable, it was a problem they had built for themselves. If you have ever watched someone be handed everything you worked for, you know the quiet kind of anger I am describing. I didn't act on it the way you might think. Keep listening. The phone call that changed everything is almost here. And if you believe a person's worth isn't decided by their family, hit subscribe and stay with me. The phone call happened on a Tuesday at 2:15 p.m. I know because I was sitting across from our attorney, Helena, in her office on St. John Street when she dialed Mr. Meyer's number in Burlington. She had drafted the offer letter, and I had approved the terms. All that remained was the call. I listened to her end of the conversation, professional, measured, the way lawyers talk when money is on the table. She told Mr. Meyer that Ironwood Restoration and Design, based in Portland, was submitting a cash-backed purchase offer for the Church Street property. She laid out the price, timeline, inspection contingency, and then stated the part that mattered. My client's offer includes a mandatory historic preservation clause. The original structure remains intact, specifically the staircase, the stained glass windows, and the front facade. Mr. Meyer, according to Helena, went silent for a long time. Then he asked why a firm from Maine cared about a staircase in Vermont. Helena said, "My client has their reasons." The developer from Boston offered more, but with a demolition clause. Ours was $40,000 lower and came with an insistence on saving the house, which must have sounded strange to everyone on that end. Crystal, who by this point was barely functioning, her husband had moved into a separate bedroom, her social media had gone dark, her company was liquidated, signed off without reading the details. My father signed because there was no other option. The bank wanted the loan settled, and Ironwood's offer was the only one that didn't involve a wrecking ball. Due diligence took 3 weeks. Our attorney submitted standard inspection requests. The title search came back clean, except for Crystal's lien, and the closing date was set for late October, almost exactly 3 years after the family meeting where I was erased from the will. One condition remained. A principal of the buyer firm would be present for the final walkthrough in person. "Who is the principal?" my father asked the realtor. "She'll be there on Thursday," the realtor said. I wasn't there for what happened next in Vermont, but Astrid told me later in pieces, the way she always delivered bad news, softly, as if handing me something breakable. Crystal got into a fight with my father the night before the walkthrough. She had finally done the math on what the sale would yield after the lien, back taxes, realtor commission, and legal fees. The answer was almost nothing. The $4 million estate my parents handed her 3 years ago had been reduced to a stack of debts and a house she had neglected to near ruin. She called my mother. She blamed the economy, the contractor who did a bad job on the kitchen, the bank for not approving a second refinance. She blamed my father for co-signing. She blamed grandmother Ingrid for leaving a house that was too old to maintain. She didn't blame herself. My mother, for the first time in Astrid's memory, didn't comfort her. Teresa sat in the guest cottage, staring at the wall, saying, "This shouldn't be happening to me. Not to Crystal, not to the family, to me." That was who my mother was. Even with a crumbling house, lost money, and her favorite daughter drowning in self-inflicted debt, Teresa's first thought was her own story. The respectable life she had built, the name she had protected, the image she had curated for 30 years in a town that was now going to watch her lose her address. My father slept in his truck that night. Astrid found out because she drove past the cottage and saw his pickup in the driveway with the seat reclined and the engine running for heat. She didn't knock. She said he looked like a man who had run out of rooms to hide in. I left Portland at 5 a.m. on Thursday, 7 hours west, the same highway, opposite direction. 3 years ago, I drove that road with $3,200 and a sealed oak box. Now I was driving it with a firm behind me, a restoration plan in my bag, and grandmother Ingrid's silver folding rule in my coat. The rule felt different this time, heavier somehow. I had measured 100 houses with it. Bungalows, mansions, Victorians, an old mill, a Queen Anne cottage converted into an art studio. Every time I pulled it out, the etched numbers told me the same thing. Here is how much space you have, and here is what you can do with it. I had never measured the house on Church Street as an adult. I walked through it as a child, ran up the stairs, pressed my face against the stained glass window to watch the snow. But I had never stood in those rooms with a folding rule in hand, seeing them the way grandmother Ingrid saw them, as dimensions and possibilities, as bones and light. That was about to change. I arrived in Burlington at noon. The town looked the same, leaves turning color, the lake calm. I parked on Main Street and sat in the car for 10 minutes, staring at nothing, breathing. Then I drove to Church Street. The Schmidt's car was in their driveway. Oscar and Greta, the neighbors who passed gossip to Crystal, who told my parents I asked for a loan I never asked for, were present for the walkthrough. The realtor invited them as a courtesy because they shared a property line. They would be standing in the house when I walked in. I checked my coat pocket. The rule was there. I got out of the car. The front porch sagged worse in person than in the photos. The east side had dropped nearly 2 inches. I could see it in the roofline without measuring. Paint was peeling in sheets. One of the porch columns had a vertical crack, and someone had tried to fill it with caulk that had yellowed and pulled away from the wood. I walked up the steps. The boards groaned. Inside, the house smelled different. Not floor wax and warmth, dampness, dust, the ghost of that embossed wallpaper grandmother Ingrid had brought from Boston, now replaced with flat plaster that was already bubbling near the baseboard. The realtor met me in the foyer, a woman named Paulina who shook my hand and led me toward the kitchen. In the kitchen, standing around the island Crystal had installed over the original hardwood, were Oscar and Greta Schmidt, family estate attorney Mr. Meyer, my father, and the realtor's assistant. My father looked older. 3 years had done something to the skin around his eyes, the way he held his shoulders, the way he stood, not by the window this time, but near the door, as if ready to leave a room he wasn't sure he belonged in anymore. He was expecting a stranger. He was expecting the principal of some out-of-state firm he'd never heard of, walking in with a hard hat and a clipboard. Paulina turned to the group. "Everyone, this is the principal and lead restorer for Ironwood Restoration and Design." I stepped forward. My father looked at me. Recognition didn't come all at once. It came in layers. The face, then the name, then the context, then the meaning. "Mr. Olson," I said. "I am the principal." The kitchen went quiet. Not a polite quiet where people wait for someone to speak, but the kind where the air leaves the room and nobody moves, because moving would make it real. Oscar Schmidt set his coffee cup down. Greta Schmidt looked at her husband. Mr. Meyer opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. My father stared at me, his lips moving before any sound came out, and when the sound finally did, it was 2 words, repeated. "That's impossible." I didn't respond to that. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the kitchen island, the very island Crystal had installed over the original 1920s floor. The folder contained the firm's portfolio, 12 completed restorations across 4 states, 2 regional preservation awards, the feature in New England Heritage, the partnership with the Boston Investor Group on the multi-million-dollar mill conversion, revenue figures, a client list, a team roster. Paulina, the realtor, had seen all of it during due diligence. She had verified the firm's finances before the offer was accepted. But my father hadn't seen any of it. He hadn't asked. He signed off because the bank said sell, Crystal said yes, and Teresa said it was for the best. He picked up the folder with both hands, the way you pick up something that might not be real. He turned the pages slowly. He saw the photos, restored parlors, rebuilt porches, staircases brought back to their original texture. He saw my name on every project page. He saw the quote from the Boston Globe. "We don't flip properties for a quick sale, we bring them back to life." His hands shook, not violently, just enough to make the pages flutter. He looked at me again and said it again, quieter this time, as if speaking to himself. "That's impossible." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out Grandmother Ingrid's silver folding rule. I placed it on the counter next to the folder. "Her drafts are in the car," I said. "I'm finishing them." My mother arrived 12 minutes late. I know because Paulina logged the time for the walkthrough record. Teresa walked in through the front door in a navy cardigan and reading glasses, stopping at the kitchen doorway the way you stop when you've walked into the wrong room at a party. She looked at me. She looked at the folder on the counter. She looked at my father, who was still holding a portfolio page and hadn't spoken since the last time he uttered those 2 words. "What is this?" she said. My father told her, or tried to. He said, "Brigida," and "firm," and "she's the buyer," and then stopped, because his vocabulary didn't have a sentence for what was happening. Teresa's face went through 3 phases in about 45 seconds. First was shock, real shock, the kind you can't fake. Second was calculation. I watched her eyes shift from the folder to me, to the Schmidts, to Mr. Meyer, measuring who knew what and how it would look. Third was tears. "Brigida," she said, her voice cracking on the second syllable. "We're still your family. After everything, we're still family." I didn't move. She took a step toward me. "We made mistakes. We should have listened. But you're here now, and that means something. It means we can fix this." I looked at her. She was crying the way she smiled at the reading of the will, with precision, every tear calculated for maximum effect, every lip quiver aimed at the audience in the room. "You called me your biggest disappointment," I said. The words were flat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Teresa's tears stopped. The calculation returned, harder this time. "That was 3 years ago," she said. "People say things." "You didn't just say it," I said. "You planned it. All of you." Her jaw set. "I am not the villain here, Brigida." I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Everyone in that kitchen had heard the words, and the folder on the counter spoke for the rest. I picked up Grandmother Ingrid's folding rule and walked toward the stairs. The kitchen was behind me. My mother was behind me. The Schmidts, Mr. Meyer, Paulina, my father, all behind me. I could feel them watching, but I wasn't performing. I was working. The dark walnut staircase was worse than in the photos. The water stain ran from the 3rd tread to the 9th, darkening the grain in a pattern that looked like a bruise. The banister wobbled when I touched it. The crack in the newel post had widened since Astrid's photo. You could fit a fingernail into it now. I pulled out the silver rule and measured the first tread. 11 3/4 inches. I measured the riser. 7.5. I wrote the numbers down in a small notebook I kept in my back pocket, just as Grandmother Ingrid wrote her numbers on the drafts, small and confident. I measured the banister height, the spacing between balusters, the angle of the turn at the landing. I ran my hand along the rail where the finish had worn down to bare wood, feeling decades of palms that had touched it. My grandmother's, my father's, mine when I was small enough to reach up instead of resting my hand down. Oscar Schmidt stood at the bottom of the stairs. This was the man who told my parents I asked him for a loan. This was his wife, Greta, who spread concern about me at a church luncheon. They watched me measure the house they had helped take from me, using the rule that belonged to the woman who built it. I didn't say a word to them. I didn't need to. The folding rule said it. The notebook said it. The fact that I was standing in that house as a buyer, not a beggar, not a disappointment, not a girl who couldn't even keep a home aquarium alive, said everything Crystal had spent 2 years trying to erase. 1-inch offset on the newel post, I told Paulina, writing it down. Grandmother would have noticed. I walked back to the kitchen. My mother stood with her arms crossed, the tears gone, replaced by something colder. My father hadn't moved. Crystal wasn't there. She had stayed in the guest cottage, and I didn't ask about her. This was no longer about Crystal. Mr. Meyer, who had read the will that erased me 3 years ago, was now holding the purchase contract that put my name on the deed. I spoke to the room, not to anyone in particular. Closing would proceed on schedule. Ironwood would restore the house according to its original 1983 plans, Grandmother Ingrid's plans. Work would take roughly 8 months. During that time, the guest cottage would remain habitable. I was prepared to offer my parents a lease on the cottage at fair market rate, $750 a month, for up to 1 year, giving them time to find new living arrangements. The lease was a business courtesy. It was not a reconciliation. It was not an invitation. It was not the start of a conversation about what they had done or why. "You're renting us our own house?" my mother said. "It's not your house," I said. "It hasn't been yours since you mortgaged it, and after today, it's mine." Teresa's face flushed red. "You ungrateful!" She caught herself, not because she ran out of words, but because Oscar and Greta Schmidt were standing 4 feet away, and the story Teresa Olson told in this town depended on her being reasonable. "I'm saving the house," I said. "I'm not saving the story you told about me." My father looked at the floor. Teresa looked at the Schmidts. The Schmidts looked at each other. Mr. Meyer closed his folder. The room had nothing left to say. We signed the closing papers the following Monday at Mr. Meyer's office on Main Street, 3 blocks from the antique shop that no longer existed. The transaction was clean. Title transferred to Ironwood Restoration and Design LLC. The lien satisfied. The bank paid off. Crystal, who attended by phone because she couldn't face the room, said 3 words during the entire call. "I understand," and "yes." My father sat across from me at the table and signed where Mr. Meyer pointed. When it was done, when the keys were in my hand, the deed filed, and the Church Street house belonged to the firm I built on rice meals and a silver rule, my father looked at me one last time. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say he was proud. He said those 2 words again, barely above a whisper, like a man testing the weight of something he couldn't put down. "That's impossible." I didn't correct him. I put the keys in my pocket next to the rule. I walked out of the office, stood on Main Street, and looked at the sky over Burlington, which was just as gray as it had been the morning I left. Then I walked to the house. I pinned Grandmother Ingrid's original drafts to the kitchen wall, the same wall where Crystal's plaster was already peeling, and I began making notes. Tread depth, riser height, baluster spacing. The staircase would be first. The restoration took 7 months. Casper came up from Portland with a crew of 2, and we brought in a local woodworker who had done work on 3 other houses in the Church Street Historic District. We replaced the porch columns, reglazed the stained glass windows with bevels sourced from a salvage yard in Concord, stripped Crystal's plaster, and repapered the dining room with a reproduction of the original pattern. Not from Boston this time, but a mill in Rhode Island that matched the color scheme down to the shade. And the staircase. We repaired every tread, stabilized the newel post with a hidden steel rod, and refinished the railing by hand the way Grandmother Ingrid had done 40 years earlier. The dark walnut glowed again, the grain showing through. When you walked up those stairs and rested your hand on the rail, you could feel the smoothness of 100 years of palms, mine among them now. My parents moved out of the guest cottage 9 months later, 1 month past the lease term, which I extended without comment. They bought a small ranch house on the other side of town. My father sent me a check for the extra month's rent. I deposited it. We didn't talk. Crystal sold the boat and took a job as a bookkeeper in a small town. Her husband filed for divorce. I heard it from Astrid, and I didn't ask for details because Crystal's consequences were her own. I didn't construct them, I didn't celebrate them, I just let them be. Ironwood used the Church Street house as our flagship location in Vermont. The before and after photos were featured in 2 publications. Casper said it was the best work we'd ever done. I told him it was the only house I'd ever restored that already knew my name. The silver folding rule sits in a glass case in my studio now, next to the oak box and the drafts. I don't use it on projects anymore. The numbers are too worn down. But I keep it where I can see it, because it reminds me of something it took me 3 years to learn. The person they crossed out of the will was the only one who ever knew how to build something that lasts. And your family's permission was never the thing that made you worth something. That is my story. The house my grandmother saved, the name they erased, and the silver rule that outlasted every word used against me. If someone once told you that you would never amount to anything, go build a quiet life that proves them wrong, and let that be enough. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.